The kitchen smelled faintly of chamomile. I had just poured hot water into a thin porcelain cup, the steam curling upward like ghosts. The house was quiet, too quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. That was when Daniel walked in. His shoes clicked against the tiles with a rhythm that immediately unsettled me. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look at the tea in my hand. He simply stopped by the counter, his voice low but sharp, like a blade drawn across glass. "We leave tomorrow. I sold your beach house." The cup slipped. Porcelain shattered against the floor, scattering into 1,000 shards that caught the kitchen light. My hand remained frozen in midair, still curved as if it held something, though it was already gone. The kettle screamed behind me, a piercing whistle that filled the silence Daniel left behind his words. I wanted to turn it off, but my body refused to move. My fingers trembled so hard they scraped against the edge of the counter. I tasted metal in my mouth. I forced my eyes to his face, searching for a trace of hesitation, some flicker that this was a cruel joke. But Daniel's expression was stone. His jaw tightened as though he had rehearsed this line for days. "Sold?" My voice cracked. The word sounded foreign in my throat. "You. You mean our beach house? The one your father built, plank by plank?" He didn't answer. He just shifted his weight, looking at the broken porcelain at my feet, as though the mess on the floor was the only problem that mattered. I felt heat rising from the kettle, steam wrapping around me like a noose. My knees buckled slightly. I pressed one palm against the cold counter to keep from collapsing. The ticking clock grew louder. Each second mocked me. "You didn't even ask me," I whispered, but it came out more like a gasp than an accusation. Daniel finally looked up. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "It's done, Mother, done." As if decades of memories could be bundled into a contract, exchanged for a check, erased with a signature. I remembered summers on that shore. Daniel as a boy running barefoot through the sand, his hair tangled with salt and wind. I remembered watching him dive into waves, calling out for me with laughter. That house was not just wood and nails. It was bone of my bone, and now he said it was gone. I bent down slowly, gathering the jagged pieces of the cup with trembling fingers. One shard cut into my skin. A thin line of blood appeared, bright against the pale porcelain. I held it there, staring, unable to tell which stung more, the sting in my hand or the gash tearing open in my chest. Daniel shifted again, restless. "You'll be fine. You don't even go there anymore." His tone was flat, dismissive, the way people talk to strangers, not mothers. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth. Why? For whom? How could you? But the words died in my throat, drowned by the kettle's endless shriek. So I stood in that kitchen, barefoot among broken porcelain, blood pooling at the tip of my finger, the steam fogging my glasses, and I realized something I had never dared to admit. One sentence had reduced my entire life to rubble. Just one line, and my world crumbled like a sandcastle against the tide. The red silk scarf still hangs on the back of my chair, frayed at the edges now, its once vivid crimson dulled by time, but it remains the one object I cannot bring myself to fold away in a drawer. It smells faintly of old books and ink, as if it still carries the dust of the libraries where I once lived. Whenever I brush my fingers against its threads, the years peel back, and I am no longer in this kitchen but in Florence, inside the hushed marble walls of the Biblioteca Nazionale. I see myself at 35, sitting at a heavy oak desk beneath a dome of light. My hair tied back, my shoulders wrapped in that very scarf, because the library was always drafty in winter. A thermos of cheap coffee steamed at my side. Around me, the ghosts of Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio seemed to whisper from the shelves. I was young, hungry, certain that words could build a future not only for me, but for my child. I earned little. Each translated page brought maybe 30 euros after taxes, sometimes less. On good months, when the publishers approved a full section, I could make 2,000. On bad months, barely 300. Still, I counted every cent, tucking coins into envelopes labeled rent, milk, school shoes. Over 20 years, I sent home more than 300,000 euros to raise Daniel. 300,000. Yet I kept none of it for myself. I didn't buy property in Florence, though the chance was there. I didn't build savings. Didn't even replace the second-hand coats I wore until the sleeves thinned to threads. Every euro I earned became bread on Daniel's plate. Books in his backpack, medical bills, tuition, birthday parties I could not attend because I was translating in a foreign city. I remember one winter in particular, the numbers etched in my bones. It was 1998. Daniel had the flu. The doctor's fee was 200 euros. The medicine, another 70. My month's pay for a section of the Divine Comedy was 420. I wired 300 home, keeping just enough for bread, pasta, and rent in my single room. That left me with 12 euros. 12 to stretch through 31 days. I lived on canned beans and day-old bread, wrapping my red scarf tighter around my shoulders at night to ward off the cold. I told myself it was worth it. Every sacrifice was worth it because Daniel was healthy, Daniel was studying, Daniel was smiling. That scarf bore witness to everything. The ink stains near the hem came from my frantic nights copying passages by hand when the photocopier broke. The tiny burn near one corner, an accident from when I leaned too close to a candle during a blackout. Each mark was a tally of devotion. And yet, looking at it now, I realize the scarf has aged better than I have. It still clings to its color. I, meanwhile, feel washed out, drained, like a book left too long in the sun. I used to imagine Daniel would grow and understand, that he would see the sacrifice woven into every coin I sent, that he would wear pride, not entitlement, when he looked at me. But somewhere along the way, pride twisted into expectation. He began to ask not if I could help, but how much this time. I remember one phone call, such a small thing, but it pricks at me still. He was 22 then, studying abroad in London. His voice was casual. "Mom, the rent is higher than expected. Can you send another 800 this month?" He didn't hear the pause, the way I clutched the phone, calculating which meals I would skip. He only heard me say yes. I always said yes, and so I built him a life brick by brick, with no bricks left for myself. I told myself love meant emptying myself out so he could be full. That's what mothers do, isn't it? They give until there is nothing left. But what if love is not meant to hollow you? What if love demands balance, not annihilation? The thought came late, too late. By the time I asked it, Daniel already carried Clara on his arm, her smile polished, her nails immaculate. I remember her first visit to my study, how her eyes flicked to the scarf draped over my chair. She tilted her head and said lightly, "It's lovely, though rather old-fashioned, isn't it?" I laughed then, dismissing it, but my stomach twisted. She saw no story in the threads, only age. Perhaps that was the first foreshadowing. Clara never touched the scarf again. Instead, she looked past it, past me, straight to the shelves of books and the accounts I kept so diligently. Now the scarf hangs quietly, more than fabric. It is a ledger, an archive of choices that cannot be undone. And I, God help me, I still catch myself defending them. "It was for Daniel," I whisper. "It was for his future." But another voice answers in the hollow of my chest. "And what about yours?" I thought love meant giving everything. But I see now, love without limits becomes permission. Permission for others to take, to demand, to forget gratitude. I stand in the kitchen, staring at that red scarf as the kettle cools and the shards of porcelain glint on the floor, and I realize with a shuddering clarity, I have trained my son not to love me, but to consume me. And that realization hurts worse than the cut on my finger. When I closed my eyes, I returned not to Florence or the libraries, but to a much smaller room in a much colder winter. It was 1989. Daniel was only 4, and the heating in our rented flat had broken down again. The walls wept with condensation. Frost etched its silver fingers across the window panes, the glass so brittle I feared it might crack under the weight of the night. I had only 2 blankets, both thin. One I spread beneath us on the mattress, the other over us, though it did little more than hold the cold in place. Daniel's little body shivered beside me. His breath came in quick white clouds. I wrapped the red silk scarf around both our shoulders, pulling him tight into my chest. It was ridiculous, of course. Silk cannot warm against winter. But in my desperation, I convinced myself it could be a shield. My body became the furnace, my arms the walls, the scarf, the last defense against the freezing dark. "Are you warm enough, sweetheart?" I whispered, kissing his hair. He nodded, though his teeth were chattering. Then his small voice asked the question that would echo in me for decades. "Mom, when will we have real heating, so it won't be so cold?" I swallowed hard. What could I say? That I had counted coins that evening, trying to decide between bread or coal? That the landlord refused to fix the radiators because we were behind on rent? That the bank balance held less than 40 euros? Instead, I tightened the scarf around him and said softly, "One day, my love, one day we will." He believed me. His trust was absolute, like the way a child believes the sun will rise again. He closed his eyes and drifted to sleep, cheek pressed to my chest, as though my heartbeat alone could convince him of safety. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake, watching frost creep across the window until dawn, whispering silent promises into the dark. I will get us out of this. I will build him a life where winters don't bite and food is never rationed. The next morning, we shared breakfast, a single loaf of day-old bread from the bakery down the street. I cut it into careful halves, then broke off the crust so Daniel's portion looked softer, fuller. He ate with tiny hands, crumbs scattering across the scarf I still wore draped over my shoulders. I pretended to eat my half with satisfaction, though it barely touched my hunger. What mattered was that he ate. I remember the way his eyes lit up when I spread jam, just a thin layer, almost transparent, but enough to paint the bread with color. "It's like cake," he giggled. And in that moment, the flat didn't feel so cold because love had filled the gaps that heating could not. Scarf absorbed everything. The faint smell of yeast from the bread, the sticky smear of jam. Daniel accidentally brushed onto it, the salt of my tears when I thought he wasn't looking. It became not just fabric, but a witness of hunger endured, of warmth improvised, of promises made on nights when promises were the only fuel we had. Years later, when Daniel turned 12 and we could finally afford a small apartment with functioning heat, I kept the scarf draped over the armchair, not because I needed it, but because I couldn't let go of what it symbolized. Every thread was stitched with memory. Every fray was a testament to survival. Sometimes I wonder if Daniel remembers those winters at all. Children forget easily, especially once comfort arrives. But I remember every detail, etched as sharply as the frost on those windows. I remember how his small hands clutched the scarf like a lifeline. I remember the weight of his head against my heart. I remember whispering, "One day," while doubting if that day would ever come. And now, decades later, as I stare at the same scarf draped across my chair, I realize that I kept my promise. Daniel grew up never again freezing through a night. He had shoes that fit, books for school, even a university abroad. But promises kept can become chains. I built a life where my son never knew cold, but in doing so, I never allowed myself warmth either. Perhaps that is why the scarf still hangs there, fragile and worn, a reminder that love gave me strength but also stripped me bare. When Daniel was little, he looked at me with gratitude and wonder. Now, he looks at me with expectation, as though sacrifice is not a gift but an obligation. The scarf slips from the chair and falls to the floor as I think this. I bend to pick it up, pressing it to my chest, breathing in its faded scent. And the memory of his small voice returns, sharp and clear. Mom, when will we have real heating? I had answered then one day. Tonight, I wonder if that day ever truly came for either of us. And with that thought, a knot rises in my throat, the kind that signals not an end, but the beginning of a storm. It began subtly. Clara had a way of wrapping her words in velvet, yet leaving a thorn beneath. We were sitting in the garden one afternoon. The roses I had planted years ago leaned heavy with late summer bloom, their scent mixing with the salt air drifting in from the sea. Clara tilted her head toward the horizon, her smile sweet, almost careless. The beach is so peaceful, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But the upkeep of a house near the shore must be exhausting, isn't it, Mother? The way she said Mother always sounded like a costume she had put on, never quite fitting. I laughed lightly, though it caught in my throat. It is fine. The house has stood for decades. It knows how to weather storms. She sipped her tea, eyes glinting. Still, insurance, repairs, taxes, it adds up. Sometimes one has to wonder if it's worth the trouble. Her words lingered like smoke. I nodded politely, telling myself she was only making conversation. But something inside me recoiled. There was too much calculation in her tone, as if she had rehearsed the numbers already. When she rose to help clear the cups, I noticed Daniel watching me. His gaze slid away the moment I met it. For a second, just one, I saw something flicker there. Unease, or perhaps guilt. That evening, alone in my study, I pulled the red silk scarf from the back of the chair. It slipped from my fingers, falling silently to the floor. I bent to pick it up, and when I looked up again, the room felt changed. The air was heavier, as though some invisible weight pressed down on the walls. I shook my head. I am imagining things, I told myself. I am tired, that is all. But deep in my chest, a chill stirred. I told myself I was merely being paranoid, yet in truth, I was already hearing the wind that heralds a storm. It was an ordinary Sunday dinner, the kind we used to have once a week. The table was set with roasted chicken, potatoes glazed in butter, and a bottle of wine I had saved for months. I wanted, foolishly, to create warmth, to remind us of family. The meal began gently enough. Daniel carved the chicken, Clara passed the plates. I watched them trying to memorize some fragile semblance of peace. But peace is fragile indeed. Halfway through, Clara set her fork down with a soft clink. She leaned forward, smile poised, her tone sweet as honey, but carrying the sting of vinegar. Mother, she said, eyes steady on mine, when will you finally transfer the house to Daniel's name? We have so many plans, and it would make things so much simpler. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of silence spread across the table. My hand trembled. The spoon I was holding slipped, striking the porcelain bowl with a sharp clang. Hot broth splashed onto the tablecloth, a stain spreading like a wound. For a moment, I could not breathe. My ears roared with the rush of blood. I looked at Daniel. He did not protest. He did not even flinch. He simply lowered his gaze to his plate, as if the roasted potatoes required his full attention. That silence was louder than Clara's demand. I tried to speak. My lips parted, but no words came. The room tilted, the walls closing in. I clutched the edge of the table to steady myself. The red scarf draped over the back of my chair slipped loose. Its edge caught against the wood and tore another fray into its already worn threads. I watched it dangle, thin, exhausted, unraveling, just as I was. Clara's voice softened, falsely concerned. It's only practical, really. You shouldn't have to worry about such burdens at your age. Daniel can take care of it all. But I heard the steel beneath her silk. My chest tightened. My heart hammered. In that instant, the truth pierced me sharper than any knife. That request was not about care. It was conquest. And in my silence, I felt decades of sacrifice collapse like brittle paper. I pressed a hand to my chest, as though I could hold the breaking pieces together. But nothing could stop the sharpness of her words driving deep, slicing through every memory, every promise, every night I had whispered, "One day, Daniel, one day will be warm." That sentence was a dagger to the heart, and I knew with brutal clarity that a mother's love was no longer something to be cherished, only something to be claimed. It began with something ordinary, a drawer that stuck, a key that wouldn't turn smoothly. I pulled harder until the wood groaned and the old oak desk finally gave way with a sigh. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, their edges curled with age receipts, bank slips, the evidence of a life spent giving. I sat there for a long time, fingers tracing the faded ink. Line after line showed the same story: money wired, checks signed, withdrawals made, always leaving, never returning. Each slip was like a diary entry, but written in numbers instead of words. The weight of it pressed against my chest until I thought I couldn't breathe. And then the questions came, sharp, relentless, like fists knocking on my ribs. How much more can I lose before there's nothing left of me? What will remain of Helena Marlowe once the last euro is gone? Why do I value his comfort more than my own dignity? What story will they write of me when I am gone? A fool, or a mother, or both? My hand shook as I shoved the slips back into the drawer. The red scarf slipped from my shoulders, brushing the floor. For a moment, I thought of Daniel as a boy, clutching that same scarf for warmth. But the memory did not soothe me this time. It burned. I rose, walked to the study shelf, and pulled down a leather-bound notebook. Its spine cracked like a whip as I opened it. This was not one of my translation journals. It was blank, waiting. With deliberate strokes, I began to write. Not another man's words, not Dante's, not Boccaccio's, but my own. It was a new will, a testament. Every letter steadied me. My pen carved boundaries no one could erase. Daniel would not receive everything. No part of it would go to the Florence Literary Foundation, a place where young translators, poor and stubborn like I once was, could find scholarships, books, light in the dark. If my sacrifices had been squandered on ingratitude, then let at least some of them bloom elsewhere. I wrote his name, then crossed it out in one clause, rewriting it with strict limits. My breath came fast. Sweat prickled the back of my neck. The sound of the pen scratching across the page was thunder in the silence. When I finally laid the pen down, I stared at what I had done. My hand left a small smudge of ink where it had trembled. But the words were there, binding, undeniable. I pressed the scarf against my lips. The silk tasted faintly of salt. The fear surged then. The stakes loomed before me. What if Daniel found out? What if Clara turned crueler than I could imagine? Would they cast me out? Would I live my last years alone, stripped not only of family, but of the illusion of family? But then another vision rose. The alternative: to do nothing, to keep giving, to let them drain me until my name meant nothing but an account number. That was the darker fate. I looked at the scarf again, and this time I did not see comfort. I saw a warning. If I allowed myself to be wrapped only in memory, I would suffocate. So I folded it neatly, placed it in the drawer with the new will, and closed it firmly. I stood straighter. My breathing slowed. For the first time in years, my thoughts did not stumble. They cut. No more trembling hands. No more silence. I whispered into the stillness as though the books and walls bore witness. If my son cannot cherish me, then let the words I loved, the books I served, inherit my life instead. If Daniel refuses to see, then I will let literature be my heir. If blood cannot honor me, then ink will. And with a final stroke of resolve, I locked the drawer. If my son will not treasure me, then I will let books and light guard what remains of me. Silence became its own language in the house. Daniel no longer lingered in the kitchen in the mornings. He moved quickly, phone in hand, muttering half-formed excuses about meetings. Clara's laughter, once too sweet, grew rarer. When it appeared, it carried a sharpness that cut the air rather than warmed it. I answered none of their questions directly. Instead, I smiled faintly, set my teacup down gently, and let the quiet grow between us. They thought I had grown soft, distracted, harmless. But in truth, my silence was armor. Each evening, when the house dimmed and their bedroom door clicked shut, I gathered my tools, my old notebook, a small tape recorder, and folders of bank statements I had hidden away. I documented everything, the transfers I had made over the years, the checks signed, the withdrawals I could prove. Line by line, date by date, my life's invisible labor became visible on paper. The act steadied me. My pen scratched softly in the dark, the sound like a heartbeat reminding me I was not powerless. But during the day, the tension pressed like humidity before a thunderstorm. Daniel began sending short text messages, curt and oddly formal. Is the account balance updated? Did you check the mail? When I replied with vague answers, his silence afterward was heavier than words. Clara tried another tactic. She lingered in the study doorway, feigning casual interest. You've been so quiet lately, Mother, planning a surprise, or perhaps hiding something. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I merely folded the red silk scarf over the back of my chair, smoothing its frayed edges with steady hands. At my age, I said evenly, the only surprise left is how many mornings I still wake up. For once, it was she who shifted uncomfortably. Still, the undercurrent grew. At dinner, spoons clinked too loudly against bowls. Footsteps in the hall carried a weight of accusation. The air itself felt charged, every glance sparking suspicion. Then came the event that told me the storm was no longer a distant shadow. One afternoon, I returned to my study and found the drawer of my desk slightly ajar. Not much, just an inch, but I knew I had closed it tight. Inside were the files I had been compiling, the drafts of my testament. My pulse hammered. From the kitchen, I heard Clara's voice float lightly, almost singing. Too light, too rehearsed. I slid the drawer shut, locked it this time, and sat in the chair with the scarf wrapped around my shoulders. The fabric was thin, fragile, but it steadied me. I realized then they had sensed my shift. My silence was not enough to disguise it anymore. And storms, once scented, do not wait long before breaking. The house was quiet still, but it was the quiet of skies just before lightning splits them open. The living room had never felt so hostile. Once, it was the heart of my home, sunlight on the rug, the faint smell of books and tea. Now, the curtains were drawn, the air thick with something unspoken. Even the red silk scarf draped across the arm of my chair seemed to sag under the weight of dread. I sat there waiting. The clock ticked too loudly. Then came the sound. Heels striking the wooden floor, a purposeful rhythm. Clara entered first, carrying a folder tucked beneath her arm. Behind her, Daniel followed, face blank, jaw clenched, and trailing them, a man in a dark suit, his briefcase gleaming, his expression unreadable. A lawyer. Clara's voice was honeyed. Mother, we brought someone to help you, to make things easier. I felt the shift in the air as the lawyer set his case on the table and began arranging papers. My stomach tightened, but my hands remained folded calmly in my lap. Help me? I asked quietly. My voice did not tremble. Daniel avoided my gaze. Clara leaned closer, smile sharpened. Yes, dear, legal matters can be such a burden at your age. This is simply simplifying things. The lawyer slid a document across the table, his pen resting neatly on top. It's a standard authorization, Mrs. Marlowe. This would allow your son to manage the property in your stead. A precaution. Perfectly ordinary. The room contracted. The only sound was the scratching of my heartbeat in my ears. I looked at Daniel. Do you agree with this? He pressed his lips together, then muttered, "It's for your own good, Mum." Silence stretched. I reached for my tea, though the cup was empty, and set it down again with deliberate care. "Tell me," I said, eyes on Clara, "why the rush?" Clara tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "Because, Mother, time doesn't wait. Why make things harder later when it can all be handled now?" Her hand pushed the document an inch closer. I glanced at the scarf on my chair, its threads worn thin but still clinging. That fabric had warmed Daniel when he was a boy. Now he sat across from me, silent as his wife maneuvered my life onto paper. My fingers brushed the scarf's edge. Then I straightened. Click. The sound was small but sharp. From beneath my chair, I placed a recorder onto the table. Its red light blinked steadily. The lawyer paused. Daniel's head snapped up. Clara's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tightening. "I am documenting this conversation," I said evenly. "Every word, every demand, every silence." Daniel slammed his palm onto the table. "For God's sake, Mom, stop this performance." His outburst rang through the room. The mask slipped. The son who once laughed on the shore was gone, replaced by a man with clenched fists and burning eyes. Clara touched his arm, whispering, "Calm down, darling." But her eyes never left me. They glittered with fury. I lifted the pen that lay atop the paper, weighed it in my hand. Then I set it down firmly. "If I sign," I said, my voice low but steady, "it will be with my own blood, and I am not committing suicide." The words cut sharper than any blade. Daniel's chair screeched against the floor as he stood abruptly, fists trembling at his sides. "Do you think we're villains? We're trying to protect you." Protect? My laugh was bitter, hollow. "You call theft protection? You call stripping me of my name, my work, my home protection." The lawyer shifted uneasily, gathering his papers. Clara's smile cracked, then hardened into something colder. "You don't understand, Mother. You're old. You shouldn't carry these burdens. Let us take them." I rose to my feet, the scarf slipping from my chair to the floor. My hands shook, but my voice did not. "Burden? That house is not a burden. It is memory, sacrifice, love poured brick by brick. If you take it, you take the marrow of my life, and I will not allow it." Clara's tone turned sharp, venom slipping through sugar. "If you resist, we will have to pursue other measures. Legal ones." The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable, but said nothing. Daniel's voice thundered. "Why are you making this so hard? You always said you wanted the best for me." My eyes locked onto his. For the first time, I saw not the boy I had raised, but the man who now stood against me. "Yes," I whispered, "I wanted the best for you, but not at the cost of myself." The recorder blinked. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Clara gathered the unsigned papers, her smile forced back into place. "Very well, think on it. But this isn't over." They left the room, the lawyer trailing behind. Daniel slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I bent slowly, lifting the red scarf from the floor, pressing it to my chest. My heart pounded, but beneath it there was something steadier, a steel that had not rusted despite years of giving. The house was quiet again, too quiet, but I knew better now. This was not the end of the battle, only the opening move of a war that had just been declared. It happened on a Thursday morning. I woke to the ringing of my phone, not a call, but a dozen alerts. Headlines lit up the screen. Local heiress shows signs of memory loss. Family seeks protection. Sources say Helena Marlowe, no longer fit to manage property. My blood turned cold. I scrolled, fingers trembling. There was a photo of me, taken without consent, leaving the library last week, scarf around my shoulders, head lowered against the wind. The caption twisted it cruelly. "Confused and fragile, the once renowned translator wanders alone." I could not breathe. My chest clenched as though the words themselves were hands squeezing my ribs. By noon, Clara's face filled the local newsfeed. She stood at a podium outside a rented hall, Daniel at her side, the lawyer flanking them. Cameras flashed. Her voice flowed with practiced sorrow. We love Helena deeply. But in recent months, she has shown troubling signs, forgetfulness, confusion, dangerous decisions with her finances. We are seeking legal guardianship to protect her from harm. This is not about property. This is about care. The crowd of reporters nodded, pens scratching. Some even clapped softly at her performance. I threw the phone onto the couch and buried my face in my scarf. The fabric smelled of ink and old winters, but for the first time it could not comfort me. Because this was no longer just a private betrayal. This was public execution. The days that followed blurred into whispers. At the cafe down the street, conversations fell silent when I entered. At the pharmacy, the clerk avoided my eyes. Even my postman hesitated before handing me the letters. I overheard fragments. Poor woman, she doesn't even realize. Sad, really. Her son's doing the right thing. I wanted to scream, I am not lost. But words lodged in my throat. Then came the false witnesses. An old colleague from a publisher claimed I had mixed up deadlines repeatedly. A neighbor swore she had seen me leave my keys in the door. Lies, all of them, but enough to stitch a false picture. It was Marcus who saved me from drowning. Marcus had been a student once, bright-eyed and broke, whom I'd mentored in Florence. He was now a lawyer, sharper than the man Clara had dragged into my home. He arrived unannounced, setting his briefcase beside the same table where the betrayal had begun. Helena, he said, leaning forward, I've read the papers. I don't believe a word. Let me fight this with you. His certainty steadied me. For the first time in days, my lungs filled fully. We gathered evidence. My recent published translation of a rare Petrarch sonnet, praised in 2 journals, signed contracts with clear dates, recordings of lectures I had given at the university only months ago. Marcus smiled grimly. These will speak louder than their lies. Still, the weight was crushing. At night, I lay awake, listening to the house creak, wondering if Daniel believed the words he was standing beside. Did he truly think me mad, or had greed hollowed him so deeply he no longer cared? Light appeared in unexpected places. Mrs. Patel, my elderly neighbor, knocked one afternoon with a basket of oranges. She pressed my hand firmly. I know your mind is sharp, Helena. I've seen you recite lines in Italian to the children on the street. Don't let them silence you. One of my former students sent a letter. Your translations taught me how to see. If they call you forgetful, they have forgotten themselves what real work is. These voices were small, but they pierced the darkness. Then the tension climbed again. Clara's camp released a statement. For Helena's safety, all financial transactions should be frozen until further notice. My bank called, politely but firmly, saying they had received instructions to review my accounts. I nearly dropped the receiver. Are you telling me I cannot access my own money? A pause. Then, it is only temporary, Mrs. Marlowe, until matters are clarified. Clarified. A polite word for chained. I hung up and pressed my palms against my temples. The scarf slipped from my shoulders, pooling on the floor like spilled blood. They are trying to erase me. But Marcus would not allow despair. He arrived that evening with copies of the journals that had reviewed my last translation. He spread them across the table, the black ink glowing like proof of life. Helena, you are not only sane, you are brilliant, and brilliance leaves a trail. I touched the pages, my fingers trembling. Reviews quoted my lines, praised the precision of my syntax, the clarity of my vision. These were not the works of a fading mind. They were mine, sharp and alive. Tears blurred the text. I lifted my head, voice steady at last. I am not only a mother, I am a name in literature, and I will not let anyone erase me. Yet as I spoke those words, a doubt gnawed at me. The courts do not always honor truth. They honor performance, documents, appearances. Clara had all three. What if my voice was not enough? What if society preferred the lie? I stood by the window that night, scarf wrapped tightly, watching storm clouds gather over the sea. Would my words still matter when the gavel fell? The message came late at night. No name, no number, just 7 words glowing on the screen. Check Clara's study. Do it tonight. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. My thumb hovered over delete, but something in my chest, an instinct sharpened by months of betrayal, stopped me. I slipped from my bed, scarf around my shoulders, and padded down the hallway. Clara and Daniel's door was shut. The silence of their wing was heavy, almost theatrical. The knob to Clara's study was cool under my hand. I turned it slowly, praying against the squeak of the hinges. Inside, the air smelled faintly of perfume and printer ink. Her desk gleamed, too tidy, but a folder jutted slightly from the drawer, as though placed in haste. My pulse hammered as I pulled it free. Cold paper, thick contracts. I flipped through, and there it was. A letterhead from a real estate agency I knew well. Clara's signature scrawled across a preliminary agreement. The words burned: exclusive rights to sell 42 Marlowe House, my only home. Not after the trial, not if she won. Now, already, my vision blurred. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on her rug. How could she? How could Daniel let this happen? Was my existence already erased in their minds? The tick of the wall clock thundered in my ears. Each second felt like a countdown to annihilation. I touched the ink on Clara's name. It smeared faintly under my fingertip, proof it was fresh. I snapped a photo with my phone, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped it. Then I heard it, the creak of a floorboard. Daniel's voice in the hallway. "Clara, you awake?" My blood froze. I shoved the folder back, closed the drawer, and pulled the scarf tighter around me as though it could hide my shaking. By the time Daniel opened the door, I was already in the hall, feigning calm. "Couldn't sleep," I murmured. Went for water. His eyes narrowed, searching my face. But he said nothing. He let me pass. Back in my room, I locked the door and pressed the phone to my chest. My heart drummed against it, matching its cold weight. I had proof now, not rumor, not suspicion, proof. The betrayal cut deeper than before, but beneath the wound was steel. If they wanted to sell my life out from under me, I would make them choke on the deed. Preparation became my salvation. Marcus spread papers across my dining table, the same table where Clara once asked me to surrender everything. Now it became a war desk. Bank statements, contracts, translations, photographs. Each sheet a weapon forged from years of labor. "We'll need dates," Marcus said, tapping a pen. "Exact figures. You've documented everything?" I nodded. Drawer after drawer of receipts, journals filled with meticulous notes, even recordings of my lectures. I had always been a translator, a chronicler of words. Now my obsession with detail might save me. The room felt different, alive, with purpose. My scarf brushed against the pages as I leaned over them like a banner laid across the battlefield. But paper wasn't enough. I had to prepare myself, so I stood before the mirror in my study, recorder in hand. My first attempt came out shaky, my voice quivering, sentences collapsing into whispers. I pressed stop, listened back, and hated the tremble. Again. Louder this time, clearer, again, slower, steady, again. Until my voice no longer sounded like a frightened widow, but like a woman who had spent her life giving words shape and fire. "You translated Dante," I reminded myself, gripping the scarf tight. "You walked through the circles of hell on paper. What is a courtroom compared to that?" I began to craft the speech I wanted the world to hear. Not only of betrayal, but of endurance. Not only of property, but of dignity. At night, when exhaustion clawed at me, light appeared again in unexpected places. Mrs. Patel brought soup, patting my arm. Speak with the same clarity you always had when teaching the children. They'll hear it. A former student video called Eyes Shining. You gave me language, Helena. Now give them yours. Even Marcus, pragmatic as ever, softened one evening. You've spent your life breathing life into other people's words. Now it's time to breathe life into your own. Their faith stitched itself into me like armor. The day before the hearing, I stacked my files neatly into a leather case. My reflection in the mirror no longer shook. My back was straight, my eyes sharp. I laid the red scarf around my shoulders and whispered, I translated Dante through hell. Why should I fear a human court? The courthouse smelled of polished wood and dust. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching in the motes that floated between rows of benches. The air was heavy with murmurs, shoes scuffing, papers rustling. I had walked into battlefields before, libraries where silence was sacred, debates where words were weapons, but never like this. This was no longer my living room, no longer whispers behind closed doors. This was public. Society itself was watching. The clerk called the case. Marlowe versus Marlowe. The syllables echoed like iron. I sat beside Marcus at the defense table. Across from us, Clara gleamed in her tailored suit. Daniel stiff at her side, their lawyer shuffling a stack of prepared notes. Clara's eyes found mine for a brief moment. She smiled. It was the smile of someone certain she had already won. Their lawyer rose first. His voice was smooth, deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because Mrs. Helena Marlowe, once a respected translator, now suffers from diminished capacity. Our clients, her devoted son and daughter-in-law, seek guardianship not out of greed, but out of concern. She has shown signs of forgetfulness, confusion, erratic financial behavior. They wish only to protect her from exploitation. He gestured gracefully toward Daniel and Clara. Daniel's eyes remained downcast. Clara dabbed at her eye with a handkerchief, the perfect performance of sorrow. The lawyer continued. We will present witnesses who can confirm Mrs. Bass's, Marlowe's decline. We asked the court to place her assets under responsible guardianship for her own well-being. His words settled like poison into the wood of the chamber. Marcus rose slowly, adjusting his tie. His tone was cooler, sharper. Mrs. Marlowe is not here to be pitied. She is here to be heard. She is not diminished, not confused. She is lucid, intelligent, and fully capable of managing her affairs. What she suffers from is betrayal from those who should protect her. And we will prove it. He placed a hand briefly on my shoulder before sitting. The first to the stand was an old colleague from a publishing house. He swore I had missed deadlines repeatedly, forgotten entire passages, cost the company money. I gripped the edge of the table. My journals told another story. Dates, invoices, every deadline met. But still, to hear lies spoken under oath sliced through me. Then a neighbor testified. She claimed she had found my keys left in my front door, that she'd heard me muttering to myself in the street. A ripple of whispers moved through the spectators. Clara's lawyer smiled thinly. Marcus called our witnesses. First, an academic, a professor of Italian literature. He spoke firmly. Mrs. Marlowe's recent translation of Petrarch is being used in my classrooms. It is meticulous. Precision like that does not come from a fading mind. Then Mrs. Patel, my neighbor, stepped forward with her basket of oranges in hand. She chuckled softly. This woman forgetful. She corrected my granddaughter's Italian homework just last week, and she quoted Dante while she did it. The courtroom laughed gently. Even the judge's mouth twitched. Clara stiffened. Finally, a former student testified. Helena Marlowe gave me words when I had none. If she is unfit, then so am I. And so is every writer she has touched. Their voices were like lanterns in the dark. Then Daniel took the stand. My son. He cleared his throat, eyes avoiding mine. My mother, she hasn't been herself. She forgets things. She becomes agitated. We're only trying to help her. I felt the knife twist. To hear my own child call me broken, in public, under oath, it was worse than any stranger's lie. I whispered into the scarf in my lap, just loud enough for myself. You were the boy I warmed through winters. How did you grow so cold? Marcus nodded to me. Mrs. Marlowe, will you testify? The room tilted as I rose. My knees trembled, but each step to the witness stand felt heavier with purpose. I placed a hand on the railing, scarf draped across my shoulders, and faced the court. Yes, I said. My voice surprised me. Clear, resonant. Marcus asked the first question. Mrs. Marlowe, are you capable of coherent thought and memory? I smiled faintly. Allow me to demonstrate. And then I spoke. First in Italian, the lines of Dante I had carried in my bones for decades. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, scella diritta via era smarrita. The words filled the chamber, sonorous, ancient, alive. Then, without pause, I translated. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a darkened wood, for the straight path had vanished. Silence fell. Even the reporters' pens stilled. I let the echo linger, then lifted my eyes. People only lose their minds, I said slowly, when they stop loving the truth. I have not, I continued, my voice gathering strength. Yes, I am old. My hands shake, my eyes blur in the evenings. But weakness is not madness. For 40 years, I have lived among words. I translated by candlelight so my son could eat. I carried manuscripts across oceans so he could study. I gave everything I had, not because I was confused, but because I was clear in my love. I turned to Daniel then, meeting his eyes. He flinched. But love is not slavery, and I will not let it be twisted into chains. My house, my work, my name, they are mine, and mine they shall remain until I choose otherwise. The scarf slid slightly from my shoulder. I caught it, gripped it tight. I stand here not as a burden, not as a shadow, but as Helena Marlowe, translator, mother, woman still alive, still thinking, still unbroken. The judge leaned forward, hands steepled. His gaze swept the courtroom, lingering on the papers, the witnesses, the silence that still hung from Dante's echo. He spoke simply. The petition for guardianship is denied. The court recognizes Mrs. Helena Marlowe as fully competent. All claims to the contrary are dismissed. The gavel struck. Bang! The sound cracked through the chamber like lightning. I sank back into my chair, tears stinging but not bitter. My chest felt light, as though some great stone had finally rolled away. Around me, Marcus smiled quietly. Mrs. Patel beamed from the back row. Even the young student clapped a hand to her mouth, eyes shining. Clara's face hardened into ice. Daniel stared at the floor. I lifted the scarf to my cheek, inhaling its worn scent. For the first time in months, the fabric did not feel heavy with memory. It felt like wings. Sunlight broke through the clouds outside, slanting across the benches, across my hands. And I smiled, a real smile. After so much darkness, light had finally spoken for me. The house was too quiet when I returned. The courtroom's echoes still clung to me. The bang of the gavel, the rustle of papers, the low gasp when I recited Dante aloud. Yet as I closed my own front door, all that noise vanished into silence. I set down my leather case, the scarf slipping from my shoulders onto the chair. The rooms looked unchanged, yet they felt foreign, stripped of their weight. Victory was supposed to taste sweet. Instead, it tasted like dust. I walked slowly through each room, fingertips brushing the walls, as though to remind myself they were still mine. My bookshelves, my desk, my teacups, untouched, yet altered forever. The shadows of betrayal lingered in every corner. In the kitchen, I boiled water for tea. The kettle shrieked, just as it had the night Daniel told me he had sold my beach house. The sound pierced me again, but this time I did not let it paralyze me. I switched it off calmly, poured the water, and carried the cup to the living room. I sat down, scarf across my lap, and tried to feel the weight of freedom. I should have felt triumphant. The court had recognized my mind, my dignity. The lies had been dismantled. But all I felt was hollow, as though the victory had carved out more space inside me than I knew how to fill. I closed my eyes. Daniel's face returned to me, not the man who had stood against me in court, but the boy who once clung to this scarf to stay warm. That boy was gone, and perhaps I had lost him long before I realized. Tears rose but did not fall. I had no tears left. The clock ticked. Evening darkened the room. Then, on the table by the door, I noticed a single envelope among the day's post. My name written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. I opened it slowly, almost reverently. Inside was a letter, ink slightly smudged. Dear Mrs. Marlowe, you don't know me. I am just a reader. Last month, I bought your translation of Petrarch. I wanted to thank you. Your words helped me through a grief I could not name. They reminded me that even pain can be shaped into beauty. I don't know what you're going through, but please know that somewhere, someone is alive today because of what you wrote. With gratitude, a stranger who reads in the dark. I read it once, then twice. My hands trembled, but not from fear, a stranger, someone I would never meet. And yet, they had found me, not through gossip or scandal, but through the only part of me that could not be twisted, my work. For the first time since the trial, something shifted in my chest. A small, steady flame. I set the letter beside my tea and whispered into the quiet, I still matter. The scarf slipped from my lap to the floor. I picked it up, not with trembling hands this time, but with a strange tenderness. It was no longer just a relic of sacrifice. It was proof that even what is worn and frayed can still give warmth. I draped it across the back of my chair and opened the window. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and the faint murmur of the city beyond. I took a long breath. For once, it didn't hurt. Tomorrow would bring questions. What to do with the house, how to live with a fractured family. But tonight, I allowed myself a different question. What if life could still hold beginnings, even now? I sipped my tea, let the letter rest under my hand, and felt the hollowness soften, not vanish, but shift into space. Space that could one day be filled again. I had survived the trial. Now it was time to learn how to live. The morning light spilled across the floorboards of my new apartment, pale and clean. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, steam rising from a cup of coffee cradled in my hands. The window was open to the park below, where children chased one another through fallen leaves. Their laughter floated up to me, light and unburdened. For the first time in years, I felt the same. Light, unburdened. This place was small, 2 rooms, a narrow balcony, shelves just wide enough for the books I had chosen to keep. But it was mine, wholly mine. No whispers behind doors, no papers slid across tables. Only silence, and the kind of peace silence can bring when it is chosen. I thought of the night when Daniel's words shattered me. We leave tomorrow. I sold your beach house. That night, the cup in my hand had felt heavier than stone. I had dropped it, porcelain splintering across the tiles, the shards mirroring my chest. Now, this cup of coffee felt lighter than air. I lifted it with ease, sipping slowly, savoring the warmth. What was once unbearable weight had become something I could carry without effort. On the back of my chair, the red silk scarf hung still. Its edges frayed, its sheen dulled. For decades, it had been my shield, against cold, against loneliness, against despair. For months, it had been my shroud, binding me to memories of sacrifice. Now it was neither. It was simply fabric, a relic of a journey survived. One afternoon, I folded it gently and placed it in a wooden frame. I hung it on the wall above my desk. No longer something to cling to, but something to honor. The scarf had carried me through winters. Now it would watch over summers. Weeks later, I boarded a plane to Italy. My chest tightened as the aircraft descended over Florence, domes, and terracotta roofs, unfolding like an open book. The Biblioteca Nazionale smelled just as it had decades ago: ink, dust, eternity. But this time, I entered not as a desperate young mother working for survival, nor as a weary old woman proving her sanity. I entered as myself, free. I sat by the tall windows, Petrarch's lines before me. But for once, I was not translating for deadlines, not laboring for rent or tuition. I was reading for the sheer pulse of it, for the joy of rolling syllables across my tongue, for the quiet thrill of meaning unfolding without obligation. I whispered into the silence, "Questa volta è per me." This time, it is for me. Back home, I joined the literary foundation that Marcus had helped establish with part of my estate. Twice a week, I read aloud to children who could not yet afford books of their own. They gathered on the floor around me, eyes wide, as I opened pages of stories translated from worlds far away. Their laughter rang out when a mischievous character played tricks. Their silence deepened when a hero stood against the dark. One boy raised his hand timidly. "Did you really write this?" I smiled. "I didn't write the story, but I carried it across a river so you could read it here. Translators are bridges, and you, perhaps, will walk farther than me." He grinned, clutching the book to his chest. In those moments, I understood that my voice mattered beyond my bloodline. Family is not only who you raise, it is who you reach. Each morning after coffee, I sat at my desk and opened a blank notebook. Not to translate another's words, but to write my own. At first, the lines were hesitant, awkward, as though my pen had forgotten freedom. But gradually, the ink flowed easier. Fragments of memory, glimpses of dreams, small observations of sparrows on the balcony railing all spilled onto the page. No editor, no deadline, no expectation. Only me. I once lived through other people's voices. Now I was beginning to find my own. One evening, standing on the balcony, I watched the sky bleed into sunset. The air carried the faint hum of traffic, the rustle of trees, the far-off laughter of strangers. I felt no loneliness, only presence. My past had not vanished. The betrayals remained, etched in scar tissue, but they no longer defined me. They were pages turned, chapters closed. I touched the scarf framed on my wall, then returned to the balcony. The night wind brushed my face, cool and tender, and in the stillness I whispered the words that had taken me a lifetime to earn. I once lived to translate the words of others. Now I write the free language of my own. If you have followed me this far, thank you. You have walked with me through silence and storms, through betrayal and courtroom battles, through nights when I doubted my own name. Perhaps in my story you have seen shadows of your own. Let me tell you plainly, without ornament, if you have ever felt used, remember this: you can put a period whenever you choose. Not a comma, not a dash to keep giving, giving, giving. A full stop. You are allowed to end a sentence that no longer deserves your breath. I wish someone had told me that sooner. I mistook endurance for love, silence for peace, sacrifice for duty. By the time I realized, decades had passed. But even then, even at 70, there was still room for change. And if there was for me, there is for you. I am not asking you to burn bridges or harden your heart. I am asking only this: listen to yourself. Ask the questions I asked in the dead of night. How much more can I give before nothing remains? What story will be written of me if I never take back the pen? Your answers may frighten you. Mine did. But fear is only the first draft of courage. So I want to leave you with a question. If it were you, would you dare to hold on to the keys of your own life? Would you keep them in your pocket, not hand them to anyone? Not even those who claim to love you most? I cannot answer that for you. I can only tell you what happened when I finally kept mine. The world did not end. The world opened. Now In my small apartment, I rise each morning, pour coffee, and write lines that belong only to me. I read to children whose laughter carries farther than any courtroom verdict. I look at the red scarf on my wall and see not a wound, but a relic of survival. My son's face still haunts me. Some nights, grief returns like a thief at the window, but grief no longer dictates my story. I do. And that, perhaps, is freedom enough. So if my story touched you, share it. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Subscribe if you want to hear more voices like mine, voices that refuse to be erased. Not for numbers, not for fame, but because stories keep us alive, even when families fail us. My story closes here, but perhaps it is the first page of your freedom.